Amanda Johnson stepped into the traditional dojo, her blue jai and yellow belt drawing skeptical stares from black belt instructors. "This ain't a fitness class, lady," Brad Hoffman sneered, pointing aggressively at her. But when they challenged her to prove herself, they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. The afternoon sun filtered through tall windows as Amanda Johnson pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Martial Arts Academy. At 42, she carried herself with quiet confidence, though her movements seemed deliberately understated. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a crisp blue jai with a yellow belt tied neatly around her waist. The dojo stretched before her, a spacious room with rich wooden walls adorned with traditional Japanese calligraphy. Red mats covered the floor, and a heavy blue punching bag hung in the corner, swaying slightly from a previous session. The air carried the familiar scent of sweat and discipline that she remembered from years past. Amanda had moved to this suburban town 3 weeks ago for a fresh start. Her previous life had become too complicated, too demanding. Here, she hoped to find peace and perhaps rediscover her love for martial arts in a simpler environment. She'd called ahead and been told that walk-ins were welcome during the afternoon session. Several students in white GIs were already training, their movements crisp and focused. Amanda watched them with practiced eyes, noting their techniques, their stances, their breathing patterns. It had been 2 years since she'd last stepped foot in a dojo, but muscle memory never truly faded. "Can I help you?" a voice called from across the room. Amanda turned to see a stocky, bald man in his mid-40s approaching. His white GI was immaculate, and a black belt with golden embroidery hung from his waist. His face carried the stern expression of someone accustomed to authority. This had to be one of the senior instructors. "I'm interested in joining your classes," Amanda replied politely. "I just moved to the area and was hoping to get back into training." The man looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her yellow belt with obvious skepticism. "I'm Brad Hoffman, head instructor here. What's your experience level?" "I have some background," Amanda said modestly. "It's been a while, though. I'm hoping to shake off the rust." Brad's expression suggested he wasn't impressed. "Yellow belt, huh? What style did you study before?" "Mixed training," Amanda answered vaguely. She'd learned long ago that being too specific about her background often led to unwanted questions and assumptions. Another instructor joined them, a lean man with dark hair and sharp features. His black belt bore similar golden details, marking him as another senior member. "Carlos Rivera," he introduced himself with a nod. "New student?" "Potentially," Brad replied, his tone suggesting he had reservations. "She says she has some background." He emphasized the words with barely concealed amusement. Amanda felt the familiar prickle of judgment she had encountered throughout her martial arts journey. Some things apparently never changed, regardless of which dojo you walked into. "Well," Brad said, crossing his arms as he studied Amanda more closely, "I suppose we could let you observe today. See if you can keep up with our training standards." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Carlos smirked beside him, clearly enjoying his colleague's subtle dismissal of the newcomer. "I appreciate that," Amanda replied evenly, though she could feel her jaw tighten slightly. "Should I warm up with the class?" "Warm up?" Brad let out a short laugh. "Lady, our warm-ups would probably wind you. Why don't you just watch for now, see how real martial artists train?" Several students had paused their practice to observe the exchange. Amanda noticed a few younger women among them, their expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity. One teenager looked particularly uncomfortable with the instructor's dismissive tone. "Actually," Carlos chimed in, "we were just about to work on some advanced sparring techniques. Nothing you'd be ready for, obviously, but it might give you an idea of what level we expect here." Amanda's eyes flashed briefly, but she maintained her composure. "I understand. I'll observe quietly." "Good choice," Brad nodded approvingly. "Martial arts isn't like those cardio kickboxing classes they have at the gym. This is traditional karate. Requires real discipline, real strength. Not everyone's cut out for it." He gestured toward a group of male students stretching nearby. "These guys have been training for years to reach this level. It's not something you just pick up as a hobby." Carlos added with a patronizing smile, "Maybe you should consider starting with our beginners class on Tuesday evenings. It's mostly housewives looking for some light exercise. Might be more your speed." Amanda felt heat rising in her chest, but forced herself to remain calm. She'd encountered this attitude countless times before, the assumption that her age, her gender, her modest appearance somehow predicted her capabilities. What they didn't know was that she'd spent the last 15 years mastering techniques they'd probably never even heard of. "I'll keep that in mind," she replied diplomatically. Brad turned to address his students. "All right, everyone, let's show our visitor what real karate looks like. Carlos and I will demonstrate some advanced combinations." As the two instructors moved to the center of the mat, Amanda settled onto a bench against the wall. She watched their movements with professional interest, noting their form, their timing, their obvious pride in displaying their skills for what they assumed was an inexperienced audience. They were competent, she had to admit. Their techniques were solid, their stances proper. But there was something performative about their demonstration, something that suggested they were more concerned with impressing than teaching. Amanda folded her hands in her lap and waited. Patience, after all, was one of the first virtues she'd learned in martial arts. The demonstration continued for 20 minutes, with Brad and Carlos showcasing increasingly complex combinations. Their movements were precise, their strikes powerful, and their obvious satisfaction with each technique made it clear they expected to be impressed. "That's how it's done at the professional level," Brad announced, barely breathing hard as he faced Amanda. "Takes years to develop that kind of control and precision." "Very impressive," Amanda acknowledged genuinely. She could appreciate skill when she saw it, even when it came wrapped in arrogance. Carlos wiped sweat from his forehead with a towel. "Most people don't realize how much dedication real martial arts requires. It's not just physical, it's mental, spiritual. You have to completely reshape how you think about conflict and control." "I imagine so," Amanda replied quietly. "Actually," Brad said, his eyes narrowing slightly, "why don't you tell us more about this background of yours? What exactly did you study and where?" Amanda hesitated. She'd hoped to ease into training without having to explain her history. "Various disciplines. I moved around quite a bit, so I trained at different schools." "Various disciplines," Carlos repeated with a knowing look at Brad. "That's usually code for, I took a few classes here and there, but never really committed to anything." Several students had gathered closer, sensing the tension building between the instructors and the newcomer. Amanda noticed the young woman she'd spotted earlier, watching with obvious discomfort. "Look," Brad said, his tone becoming more aggressive, "I don't want to embarrass you, but we run a serious dojo here. We can't have people coming in thinking they know what they're doing when they clearly don't. It's dangerous for everyone involved." "I understand your concern," Amanda said, her voice remaining steady despite the growing irritation she felt. "Do you?" Carlos stepped closer, his posture becoming more intimidating. "Because honestly, watching you sit there pretending to evaluate our techniques when you're wearing a yellow belt, it's kind of insulting." The room had gone completely quiet now. Even the students who'd been practicing in the far corner had stopped to watch the confrontation unfold. "Maybe," Brad said, his voice rising slightly, "you should stick to yoga classes. Leave the real martial arts to people who've actually earned the right to be here." Amanda felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not fear. She hadn't felt afraid in a dojo for over a decade, but recognition. She knew exactly what this was, a calculated attempt to humiliate her, to make her feel small and unwelcome. "I'm not here to cause problems," she said calmly. "I just want to train." "Train?" Carlos laughed harshly. "Lady, you couldn't handle 5 minutes of what we do here. You'd probably hurt yourself trying to keep up with our beginners." "That's enough," the young woman Amanda had noticed earlier spoke up. "She hasn't done anything wrong. She's just trying to—" "Sarah, stay out of this," Brad snapped. "This is between us and her." Amanda looked at Sarah, probably in her late 20s, with determined eyes and a green belt around her waist. She was clearly uncomfortable with how her instructors were behaving, but also obviously intimidated by them. "Actually," Amanda said slowly, rising from the bench, "maybe we could settle this in a more constructive way." Both instructors turned to face her fully, their expressions shifting from dismissive to interested. "What did you have in mind?" Brad asked, though his tone suggested he already knew where this was heading. Amanda looked around the room at the watching faces, some curious, some nervous, some hopeful. She thought about Sarah, who'd tried to stand up for her. She thought about all the other students who might face similar treatment if these instructors weren't challenged. A simple demonstration, she said quietly. Let me show you what I can do. The silence that followed Amanda's words was electric. Brad and Carlos exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from surprise to what looked like predatory anticipation. A demonstration? Brad's voice carried a dangerous edge. Are you seriously challenging us? I'm offering to show you that appearances can be deceiving, Amanda replied calmly. If I'm as inexperienced as you believe, then you have nothing to worry about. Carlos stepped forward, his posture aggressive. Lady, I don't think you understand what you're suggesting. We're not talking about some light sparring here. This is serious martial arts. I understand perfectly, Amanda said, her voice gaining strength. You've spent the last half hour questioning my credibility and insulting my experience. I'm simply offering to let my skills speak for themselves. The students had formed a loose circle around them now, their faces reflecting a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Sarah looked particularly worried, clearly concerned about what might happen to the woman who'd tried to defend her earlier. This is ridiculous, Brad said, but Amanda could see the gleam in his eyes. He was enjoying this. The prospect of publicly humiliating someone he saw as a pretender. You realize that if you get hurt, it's not our responsibility? I accept full responsibility for whatever happens, Amanda replied. All right then, Carlos said, rolling his shoulders. But we're not going to go easy on you just because you're a woman. If you want to play with the big boys, you get treated like one. Amanda almost smiled at that. If only they knew how many times she'd heard similar words from men who'd underestimated her over the years. What kind of demonstration did you have in mind? Brad asked. Forms? Breaking? Or do you actually think you can spar with us? Your choice, Amanda said simply. I'm confident in any format you prefer. The instructors looked at each other again, communicating silently. Amanda could practically see them calculating how to maximize her humiliation while minimizing any chance they might look bad in the process. Forms are too subjective, Carlos decided. Anyone can memorize a routine and make it look pretty. Sparring it is then, Brad agreed. Light contact, of course. We're not trying to actually hurt you. The condescension in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Amanda nodded her acceptance. Should we set up some rules? Sarah called out nervously. No need, Brad waved her off. This'll be over quickly anyway. Amanda began stretching slowly, methodically. Her movements were fluid and controlled, each stretch precisely executed. A few of the watching students noticed the grace in her preparation, the way she seemed to be centering herself, rather than simply loosening muscles. You know, Carlos said as he watched her stretch, it's not too late to back out. No shame in admitting you're in over your head. I appreciate the concern, Amanda replied, touching her toes in a stretch that demonstrated remarkable flexibility for someone her age. But I'm exactly where I need to be. Brad shook his head with exaggerated disappointment. Your funeral. Just remember, you asked for this. As Amanda finished her preparation, she looked around the circle of faces watching her. She saw doubt, concern, curiosity, and, in a few cases, hope. These students had been watching their instructor's behavior, and some of them clearly didn't like what they'd seen. She thought about all the dojos she'd walked into over the years, all the men who'd looked at her and seen weakness, limitation, someone to be dismissed or patronized. She thought about the countless hours she'd spent proving herself, over and over again. Today, that pattern would end. Ready when you are, she said quietly, moving to the center of the mat. Brad stepped onto the mat first, his confidence radiating like heat. He assumed a fighting stance that was textbook perfect, balanced, stable, ready for action. Carlos moved to the edge of the mat, presumably to referee, though his smirk suggested he was really there to enjoy the show. Ladies first, Brad said with mock courtesy, gesturing for Amanda to make the first move. Amanda settled into her own stance, and something subtle but significant changed in the atmosphere. Her posture was different now, not the modest, accommodating woman who'd walked in 30 minutes ago, but something else entirely. Her center of gravity lowered, her awareness expanded, and her breathing became deep and controlled. A few of the more experienced students noticed the transformation. Sarah's eyes widened slightly as she observed Amanda's stance. It was unlike anything she'd seen in their dojo before. Interesting guard, Carlos murmured, his casual dismissiveness wavering slightly. Amanda didn't respond. Her focus had narrowed to the man in front of her, reading his posture, his balance, his tells. Brad was strong and technically sound, but he was also overconfident and angry. That combination had been the downfall of many opponents over the years. "Any time now," Brad prompted, bouncing slightly on his toes. Amanda moved. It wasn't a dramatic assault or a flashy technique. Instead, she simply stepped forward and executed a basic straight punch, something any yellow belt should know. But the speed and precision with which she moved caused Brad to stumble backward, clearly caught off guard. "Lucky shot," he muttered, resetting his stance. Amanda had already returned to her guard position, her expression unchanged. She'd tested his reactions now, measured his timing, confirmed what she'd suspected about his defensive patterns. "My turn," Brad announced, launching a combination of punches that would have overwhelmed most intermediate students. Amanda slipped each strike with minimal movement, her head and torso flowing like water around his attacks. She didn't counterattack, didn't show off. She simply demonstrated that his techniques couldn't touch her. The watching students began to murmur among themselves. This wasn't what they'd expected to see. "Hold on," Carlos called out, his voice sharper now. "How did you—" Amanda had moved again, this time with a sweep that caught Brad's leading leg. He managed to maintain his balance, but barely, and the look on his face had shifted from confidence to confusion. "Where did you learn to move like that?" Brad demanded, his breathing slightly heavier now. "Various places," Amanda replied, the same answer she'd given earlier. But now it carried different weight. Sarah stepped closer to the mat. "She's barely breathing hard," she whispered to another student. Brad launched another attack, this time more aggressive, trying to use his size and strength to overwhelm her. Amanda absorbed his pressure calmly, redirecting his energy rather than meeting it head-on. She was beginning to show more of her skill now, subtle foot sweeps, perfectly timed counters, defensive movements that flowed from one into the next like a choreographed dance. "This isn't possible," Carlos said, no longer trying to hide his surprise. "Yellow belts don't move like that." Amanda caught Brad's wrist mid-punch and used his own momentum to spin him off balance. For a moment, he was completely vulnerable, and everyone in the room could see it. She could have followed up with any number of techniques that would have ended the demonstration immediately. Instead, she simply released him and stepped back. "What are you doing?" Brad gasped, his face flushed with exertion and embarrassment. "Showing you what I can do," Amanda replied quietly. "But I'm just getting started." The room was completely silent now, except for Brad's labored breathing. Every student was staring at the woman who'd walked in wearing a yellow belt and was now making their head instructor look like a beginner. "This is impossible," Brad panted, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "There's no way a yellow belt." "Should be able to do that," Amanda finished for him. "You're absolutely right." She began moving around the mat in a slow circle, her footwork now displaying the fluid precision that marked years of advanced training. The watching students tracked her movement with amazement. This wasn't the hesitant newcomer they'd seen arrive an hour ago. "Who are you?" Carlos demanded, stepping onto the mat himself. "Really?" "I'm exactly who I said I was," Amanda replied. "Amanda Johnson. I just moved here. I have some martial arts background. Everything I told you was true." "Some background?" Brad let out a bitter laugh. "Lady, you've been toying with me this whole time." "I tried to avoid this," Amanda said, her voice carrying a note of regret. "I came here hoping to train quietly, to fit in without drawing attention. But you made that impossible." She stopped moving and faced both instructors directly. "You want to know about my background? Fine. I've been training for 26 years. I hold black belts in multiple disciplines. I've competed internationally and taught at some of the most respected dojos in the country." The silence that followed was deafening. "Then why the yellow belt?" Sarah called out, her voice filled with wonder rather than accusation. Amanda smiled for the first time since entering the dojo. "Because rank is just a piece of cloth. I've learned that if you walk into a new place wearing a high-ranking belt, people either challenge you to prove yourself or treat you like a threat. I wanted to see what kind of place this was, how you treated beginners, how you handled someone you thought was beneath you." Brad's face had gone pale. "You were testing us." "In a way," Amanda acknowledged. "And unfortunately, you failed." Carlos stepped forward aggressively. Now wait just a minute. Amanda's movement was so fast that most of the students missed it entirely. One moment Carlos was advancing on her, the next he was face down on the mat with his arm controlled in a joint lock that rendered him completely helpless. The difference between us, Amanda said conversationally, maintaining the hold with effortless control, isn't just technical skill. It's respect. I respect the art, I respect my training partners, and I respect the responsibility that comes with knowledge. She released Carlos, who rolled away and scrambled to his feet, his face burning with humiliation. You came in here pretending to be something you're not, Brad accused. No, Amanda corrected firmly. I came in here being exactly what I am, a martial artist who wanted to train. You saw a middle-aged woman with a yellow belt and decided I wasn't worth your respect or consideration. That says everything about your character and nothing about my honesty. She looked around at the circle of students, her expression softening. Real martial arts isn't about dominance or intimidation. It's about discipline, respect, and continuous learning. A true sensei teaches and protects all students, regardless of their apparent skill level or background. We should have, Sarah began. You should have done exactly what you did, Amanda interrupted gently. You stood up for someone you thought was being mistreated. That took courage, and it was the right thing to do. Brad and Carlos stood together, their earlier confidence completely shattered. They'd gone from being the undisputed authorities in their domain to being thoroughly outclassed by someone they'd dismissed as irrelevant. I think, Amanda said quietly, it's time for me to find a different dojo. She walked toward the bench where she'd left her bag, her movement still displaying that impossible grace that had amazed everyone present. Wait, Sarah called after her. Don't leave because of them. Amanda paused at the bench, her hand resting on her gym bag. Around her, the dojo buzzed with whispered conversations as students processed what they'd just witnessed. She's right, said Marcus, a brown belt who'd been training at the dojo for 3 years. I've seen how you two treat people who don't fit your idea of what a martial artist should look like. Other students began nodding and murmuring agreement. Sarah stepped forward, her voice gaining strength. This isn't the first time. Remember when Mrs. Chen wanted to join? You told her she was too old. And what about Jake's little sister? You said girls couldn't handle real training. Brad's face reddened. Now hold on. No, you hold on, interrupted David, a quiet teenager who'd been training for 2 years. I've been watching you guys humiliate people for months. I thought that's just how martial arts worked, but seeing her, he gestured toward Amanda. That's what real skill looks like. And she never once made anyone feel small. Carlos tried to regain control. Listen, everyone's getting carried away here. This was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Amanda turned back to face him. You called my experience fake. You suggested I was lying about my background. You told me I belonged in a housewives' fitness class. Which part was the misunderstanding? The students were looking at their instructors with new eyes now. The authority and respect that Brad and Carlos had commanded through intimidation was crumbling before their eyes. Maybe, Sarah said slowly, Amanda could teach us. Show us what real martial arts looks like. That's not how dojos work, Brad protested weakly. There are protocols, hierarchies. Hierarchies built on actual skill and wisdom, Amanda interjected, not on the ability to make others feel small. She looked around at the eager faces surrounding her. These students genuinely wanted to learn, to grow, to become better versions of themselves. They deserve better than instructors who use their position to feed their own egos. I'll tell you what, Amanda said after a moment of consideration. I'll be in Memorial Park tomorrow morning at 7. If anyone wants to learn about respect, discipline, and genuine martial arts, you're welcome to join me. She slung her bag over her shoulder and walked toward the exit. A real martial artist knows that the highest form of strength is the wisdom to know when to use it, and when not to. As she reached the door, she turned back one last time. And a true teacher elevates their students rather than diminishing them to make themselves feel bigger. With that, Amanda Johnson walked out of the dojo, leaving behind a room full of people who would never again mistake quiet confidence for weakness, or assume that authority automatically deserved respect. The revolution in their understanding of martial arts had only just begun. The next morning, 15 students gathered in Memorial Park. Sarah was there, along with Marcus, David, and a dozen others who'd witnessed the events at the dojo. Even Mrs. Chen, the older woman who'd been turned away months earlier, had somehow heard about the gathering and arrived eager to learn. Amanda appeared at exactly 7 o'clock, wearing simple workout clothes and carrying only a water bottle. No flashy uniform, no elaborate equipment, just the quiet presence that had commanded respect through demonstration rather than demand. "Before we begin," she said, addressing the group, "remember that true martial arts isn't about proving you're better than others. It's about becoming the best version of yourself while helping others do the same." As the sun rose over the park, Amanda began teaching her first lesson, that real strength lies not in the ability to dominate, but in the wisdom to know when power should be used to protect rather than intimidate. If you've ever been underestimated because of how you look or where you come from, remember Amanda's story. True strength isn't about proving others wrong. It's about staying true to yourself and lifting others up along the way. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up to bullies in an unexpected way? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how everyday heroes have inspired you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories that remind us never to judge a book by its cover, and let us know where you're watching from. Until next time, remember, respect is earned through character, not demanded through intimidation.